Namaste, everyone. Thank you for joining another episode of my conversation with my friend Shankar Bharadwaj Khandavali. All my conversations with him, as I've shared before, are very, very profound. And we explore different topics from Dharma Rajya to Islam to invasions into India and all sorts of things. Today, the topic of our discussion is the vision of Hinduvi Swarajya or a Dharma Rajya. What does it really mean? What is the conceptualization? I imagine that this is probably not going to end in one conversation. So we might have a series of conversations, perhaps on this topic, before we move on to another topic in these conversations. So welcome. And when you're seeing the video, please leave your comments and your questions if you learned something new in the comment section. Ask your questions and maybe I can pick them up with Shankar in my following conversations. Thank you very much. Welcome, Shankar. Namaste. A talk by Ambrish Fadnavis at Sangam Talk. He talked about Anandvan Bhuvani. It seems to be a poem written by Samarth Swami Ramdas, inspiring Shivaji or perhaps written, praising him that there is a Hinduvi Swarajya now happening. And he's dreaming of a Hinduvi Swarajya where he's talking about tirthas and other things. In general, I've tried to find out what was Shivaji Maharaj's vision of Hinduvi Swaraj. What was the conceptualization? And other than Desh Dev Dharma, which actually comes up in the movie, this is Tanhaji, the movie Tanhaji. Tanhaji's wife is actually mentioning Desh Dev Dharma. And of course, we know that the whole point about protecting Brahmins was edited out of the movie. Shivaji Maharaj's conceptualization or Maratha's conceptualization of what Hinduvi Swarajya would look like. That will be a great starting point.
If we take one step further back, what is the background of Hinduvi Swaraj or why it had to be coined that way? We have seen over time, let us say there was a Ramarajya, even Gandhi talks of Ramarajya. Then we know of Yudhishthira's Samarajya, where he had established a dharmic state. And then from time to time, then Vikramarka was there. From time to time, great emperors, great Chakravartis have established a dharmic state. So time to time, we had this attempt at establishing a righteous state. They always not necessarily had a proper noun to it, calling it this or that. The most popular probably had become the Ramarajya. That is why a lot of people had taken that name as late as this century. I think it will continue to be. Anything successful would probably be compared to a Ramarajya, even in the future, because Rama is our civilizational icon no matter how many centuries pass by. Then what exactly is this about Hinduvi Swaraj? Why did they have to come up with this term and not just a continuation of a re-establishment of a dharmic state? Because such attempts have happened. The Vijayanagara did, the Kakatiyas did, the Ahoms did, everybody tried and succeeded to whatever extent they had established. Why did this idea of Hinduvi Swaraj take off, and why is its legatee today, the Hindutva movement, although it doesn't exactly use the same terminology, it now uses Hindu Rashtra instead of Hinduvi Swaraj. It's honestly, in my opinion, it's a politically correct redefinition, not really a change of idea, if you ask me, because Hinduvi Swaraj is more of a political model, and we don't want to say that we want to establish a Hindu state today in a secular democracy. It's just that political correctness. Conceptually, I don't think they crave anything very different, whether it is Savarkar or the RSS or the later movements. They basically want the same thing, but they want it to suit to today's socio-political model. Why did that coinage of Marathas become so relevant today? All the way in the past, until the Marathas, it was taken for granted that the Indic civilization has certain state and society model, and that model was never challenged. Outsiders came, the invasions came, and then they were repelled. And then eventually the default idea was that this society, this land always has certain culture and certain polity that is suited to govern it. And that had been fundamentally changed with the advent of Islam, with the imposition of Islam. The differences are manifold. Wherever the Islamic empires came, the social order was changed. It got feudalized, it got oppressed. A lot of changes, social changes also internally came, not just that a political model was changed. So the Desha, Dharma, Deva, all the three were disrupted. Therefore, there was a need not just to re-establish a polity that is protective of the civilization, but also a polity that makes a distinction between the insider and the outsider in terms of ways of life. Let us say the Shakas or Hunas or whoever came, they eventually got assimilated. We had a solution for them to assimilate eventually, so that the civilization had continued to prosper. Now, what we saw in the recent centuries was not a assimilative invader. We saw a invader who wants to assimilate us into him and remove our own identity. So that is where this need to separate the insider and outsider had come at the identity level. That is where the Hindu and non-Hindu distinction came. Otherwise, technically, strictly speaking, the Hindu is basically a geographic identity. Everybody knows that. But that was not sufficient to make such an distinction, because now inside the territory itself, you had 20-25% of people who were believing in an outsider mindset or outsider ideology. So to ensure that we have a solution for that division, distinction, you need a Hindu empire not just governing the Hindus. It also needs to have a solution for the entire landscape and people of all forms of life, people following all ways of life. In that context, it is the Haindavi Swaraj that the Marathas had conceived. And the today's Hindutva movement, which I would practically say is a legacy of the Marathas in almost every way. It is the Hindutva is nearly just a political replacement. Its primary focus is not spiritual, cultural, although it says so. It claims that it is socio-cultural. It doesn't claim to be a political movement, but basically it is trying to fill the political void that got created by the colonial government, colonial state. I mean, we can go into that criticism later on, but primarily in terms of polity, this is the rationale for us. Earlier, it was universal. They did not need to distinguish the insider and outsider because the outsider became part of us. So in our ecosystem, he could coexist peacefully with others. Now we have an ideology which doesn't believe in coexistence. So you needed a different definition. That is the origin of the Haindavi Swaraj. And same with Savarkar's, same with the Hindu Rashtra that the Arya Samaj or the Hindu Mahasabha or RSS, all these people also vouch for.
Just maybe a little deviation, but the RSS actually goes on beating the drum, if you like, that all the word Hindu actually includes Muslims and includes Christians, and what you classified as outsider mentality, if you like, people who will not coexist with the civilizational values. Is there a comment you have on that?
Don't have to take it very seriously, because firstly, they believe in the ground operation. They don't believe in technical definitions. They don't care the definition is accurate. Think whatever works. So I would not actually give too much of weightage to the convenience definitions. It is a convenience definition. But secondly, they are not very wrong in that when you talk of their position about the church or the Muslims, they basically say your loyalty needs to be to the land. Then it doesn't matter what you follow. This is also basically what the Marathas or any other Hindu empire had been telling the Abrahamic. From this position, are they insiders? Yes. Are they insiders of this land? They are insiders of the land. Again, Savarkar's distinction comes, right? Do they have this as only the fatherland or the holy land? Obviously, it is not their holy land. It is only their fatherland. So they have a divided loyalty that is accepted everywhere. It's not as if we have to now debate that. Question is, what is the solution to it? And how do you make them feel part of this land? How do you not alienate them? Because as persons, they are persons. It's not as if there is one ideology making them behave in a certain way. So you also need to, while you require the clarity to deal with the problem, you also need to make bridges in a way that problem becomes solvable, that assimilation becomes solvable, possible in a long term. How is it done? Is this the correct definition or not? Yeah, it is an open question. You can debate on it. But in itself, you don't have to really go into the definition and call it wrong. Because I don't think they're actually trying to give a definition there. They're just using convenience. You need some way to tell them that you belong to this land, but you believe in an ideology that is making you non-assimilative. How do you convey this? I think they have taken this terminology, which may not be accurate. I believe it will evolve over time. They will also change their definition.
And so help me again. So you're saying that this definition of both Hindutva Swarajya and say the idea that outsider or alien value systems, to make them at least have some loyalty to the holy land, if you like. So is it more a political thing? Is it more a political boundary? Is it to the land, or is it to the spiritual values? Because the moment you call it holy, it becomes holy because of the spiritual value systems, because of the Shakta Pithas, of the Jyotirlingas, of the sacredness of the Indian geography, which cannot be separated from the spirituality.
Yeah, but that part is clear. I think that this is treated as holy land only by the pagans is pretty clear. I don't think there is any confusion there. The others, the Abrahamics who live here, they only have this as their fatherland, not as a holy land.
So what is the vision of Hindu Rashtra? Not vision, I don't want to get into your communication of the solution and all of that, but say the RSS idea of that if you are in India, you're a Hindu, and so they are basically trying to say that at least have your loyalty to the fatherland, and
Yes.
do not have split loyalties which actually look to areas outside of the political boundaries of India as also your brethren.
Yes, and like saying you should have a Indian church which has loyalties to India. It should not be sponsored from external countries. All these sorts of things.
Okay.
So these are basically their asks. Same with the Islamic thing. Don't be a colony of Arabs inside India. Be Indian Muslims.
Okay, can we delve a little bit on this of the Indian church and Indian Muslims of this idea? Maybe want to take you, and hopefully we'll come back and not get lost in this direction. Is the Pashmanda Muslims, for example, right? We've been having talks in Sangam Talks with people like Muhammad Faiz Khan, a wonderful man, with Fayaz Ahmed Faizi. And Fayaz Ahmed Faizi, for example, belongs to this new movement, this upcoming movement called the Pashmanda Muslim movement. They basically, he and a large part of them, I find, are from Bihar. I'm sure there are people who call themselves part of the Pashmanda movement from Karnataka, Andhra, Tamil Nadu, other places. At least they say so, but they are from Bihar, and they say that basically all our traditions, all right, the marriage tradition, not all, sorry, marriage traditions, for example, we will go do a but basically come home and do all the haldi in the hand, the way when you enter a home, the footprint in the home. They will even do some sort of a phira. I recently heard on some Badmed 250 Muslims who, after the Ram Janmabhoomi movement or the Shilanyas of the Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir, actually said enough is enough. We are now formally converting into Hinduism. They decided among themselves only. And I was looking at the video, and they were basically saying that all our customs are Hindu, except when we die, we were buried. Other than that, probably nothing. Yes, we would go to a masjid. There also, we would not be treated equally. Yeah, by the, I don't know, by the ashrafs, for
They
example,
are anyway that second grade, third grade
Muslims.
Muslims treated from the Arab
Yeah.
standards.
And so there are some part of Muslims who actually claim their ancestry to the Arabs or the Turks and call themselves true Muslims, even though I'm not sure if there is any lineage there, or is it just that they have adopted a surname which elevates them to some level. I'm not even sure about that.
Yeah.
So, so I was seeing these people, right? And so, for example, Faiz Muhammad Khan actually goes to Vaishno Devi. He's such a wonderful man. Will actually go and put a mitti in the Ram Janmabhoomi Mandir, saying that ye Ram ka mandir mera bhi hai. Yeah? And travels all over. Of course, he got massive criticism for it and was massively under attack. He is now somebody I'm well acquainted to. So I know him very well. I know his values very well. I can vouch for him. Yeah. And he keeps his roza, does his namaz, but basically at heart, he's a Hindu. All his values are, he goes to temples.
So there are many like that. In fact, but the question is, how would their number increase? You don't have to adopt these practices, but you should understand that this is the land and I can coexist with people here, rather than seeing them as different from me. When it comes to my society, it should not be two societies altogether. It should be just like we anyway are a diverse society. We are not a monolithic society. We don't believe in one religion or one cultural group or one social group. We have infinite group.
But for that, would they not have to, like the Jews take the Old Testament, would the Muslims of India not have to start taking Quran and very loosely that, yeah, I mean, this has its place, it has no relevance right now. I mean, we can still believe in some monotheistic idea of one God and all of that.
Yeah, no, that's where I'm coming. So for that to happen, that assimilation process, if you see the Bhakti movements, they had actually laid bridges for such. See, you can't start from the top and get these things done with a monotheistic system, because it is not open for an argument. Indian traditions, you have all these sampradayas, they are primarily open for debate. That is how they enable assimilation or harmony. So harmony in this case needs to be achieved from the ground, not from the philosophy, because philosophy is fundamentally intolerant. So at the same time, you can't say they have to reject their philosophy. So you need to take things to a pass where philosophy becomes redundant. And day-to-day life, majority of individuals in any society, they don't care a damn about philosophy, right? They care about what they practice day-to-day. Philosophy is in any society meant for a minority. Philosophy is only visible through certain practices, but it's not as if people try to live philosophy day-to-day consciously. So this problem needs to be tackled at the ground level, where person to person you try to build that thing. That is how people like I forget Ibrahim Gardi or whoever, those people who could transcend those boundaries and achieve harmony. That's how they did. On a parallel thread, parallel effort, can the philosophy be refined? Is it possible? That is it needs to be worked out. There is no doubt. Once it is exposed, let us say, I forget again the name, Kerala governor.
Arif Muhammad Khan.
Sorry. So he is also practically a Hindu for all but again, he does not again delve into this philosophy. All practical examples you see, they don't actually get into the philosophy.
Actually, I find him taking Quranic verses and applying the idea of oneness to almost a Brahman level of oneness. He transcends that. He does not reduce the Allah to the Christian or Islamic version of a jealous and angry and all of that God. He takes them and actually applies them to a Brahman concept, a Dvaitic concept. That's what I continuously find in his lectures. We've hosted him.
Yeah. So
In some terms, he's a blasphemer by the core.
exactly. So if you, that's what. So he's basically putting your philosophy into that terminology so that it becomes relatable, and then right, it's not exactly that he's either changing their philosophy. So yeah, it's a, I think, a long way to go in terms of assimilation. That's a very long way to go. There need to emerge a lot of articulations that enable such thing. Okay, I tend to see this at 4 level, as I have explained in the Dharmarajya thing also. The worldview, then the doctrine level, then you have an institutional level, then there is a lived reality. Lived reality is where person to person interaction and the human relations in the society, how you influence things and make them live with you side by side. Because all said and done, we know that we have earlier worked with a lot of invaders, the Shakas, Hunas, and over time, and even more recent ones. If you see the Baloch region, also they live more like pagans than the intolerant Abrahamics. So the influence, spheres of influence keep expanding.
Even the Kurds, possibly. You agree? Yeah,
Yes,
Kurds also. Yeah, fine.
That's why they are facing troubles there. So that is one. Then the institutional, can we actually influence their institutions, which is not practical because they have to redefine their institutions to become more tolerant or whatever, so that their operation becomes, because institutional structure determines how individuals actually conduct, what are the regulations under which they behave.
By institutions, you mean the madrasas and the masjids, or?
So in our case, the institutions would be like your varnashramas, then the vivaha, the marriage, the brahmacharya, all these things. The continuing processes, if you would want to call that. Not exactly the organizations governing these institutions.
Sorry, I might have lost your flow of thought. Are you saying modify the institutions, which means the Abrahamic institutions? Or are you saying our institutions and make them ready to?
No, I'm giving the example of what I'm referring to as institutions. Similarly, for them, they have their marriage system, they have their brotherhood, whatever they have as construct, their collective construct.
I mean, give me an example there, right? Ummah is a collective construct, for example.
It is, yeah.
Like Jamaat is. But that's not is that, would you call that an institution? The institution would be the madrasa or the.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So the collective processes and constructs which are there, which are continuing. Okay. And then you have the organizations that are running these things, governing these practices.
Okay.
Or so these organizations are temporal, they can change, but these organizations are designed according to those processes and their doctrine. The doctrine itself draws from the worldview. Basically, what is the nature of man, what is the nature of world, what is the nature of divine, and what is the relation between these three. And this is the basis for all the doctrines. So now, can you change their worldview? Can you change their doctrine in a way that their institutions will change? That is all practically out of bounds for us. That has to happen internally for each society. But for anything to happen, the thought process change has to happen. At the lived reality, things have to change. And with human experience, first-hand experience, people find the need to change. That probably is how the Hindutva is currently dealing with the problem. They are trying to bring a change at that level. And then inspired people are trying to give articulations saying, no, this is how you can interpret so that you can achieve harmony, live a peaceful coexistence.
The collective processes draw from institutions and institutions from doctrines, which draw from further from their worldview. And it is not possible for us possibly to change their worldview. Worldviews need to happen from internal. Yes. So you're saying that our work has to be at the lived reality level, which is people to people connect. Correct. And which is what the RSS, for example, is trying to do by calling them Hindus.
Yeah, I'll correct. So, yeah, thanks for bringing me back to the right point. So, from the point where the people are inspired and want to change. So, for instance, there are people who want to practically convert.
Okay.
Or formally also convert, but who cannot. There is a blasphemy law, and there is a threat to life. So there it's a question of incentive system where am I encouraged to change my ways of life? Am I allowed to change my ways of life? The incentive is always downward, right? A civilized man can always become a barbarian, but the other way around is difficult. And terror operates quite in that direction. Terror is the main construct that or the main instrument that keeps the believer a believer. It prevents a believer from becoming a non-believer, and it prevents a non-believer from poaching any believer. Once you deal with that, once the terror as an instrument has been dealt with, then peaceful coexistence is achieved. And that is exactly how the Hindu kings had dealt in the past. Once they had established the Hindu empire, the terror element was removed. Now, when people were coexisting, Hindus and Muslims, they didn't have any social problems. And wherever there was a problem, there was a peaceful solution also, because people to people dealings were fine.
So both, they removed the terror. Of course, their ability to do terror on the Hindus, as well as the terror within their own societies, like the blasphemy laws. They removed both. That you cannot kill or behead, like they say, sartan se juda, for either criticizing Muhammad or for somebody wanting to convert. Both of them punishable by beheading under Islam. So the
second part was not dealt very strictly. I don't think the interference was to the point that you can't apply a blasphemy law. That internal threat was possibly still there, but each society had its own independent existence, so that was not a big issue. Because Hindu society also had its own constructs of outcasting people. So it worked both ways, and overall there was a equilibrium. And that equilibrium ensured harmony and non-violence at the people level. Whenever there was an attack, there was a counter-attack. That meant that there was no need for them to attack. There was no, or not more than need, there was no benefit in attacking, because it would be met with counter-violence, and there is no productive gains for any society to attack any other society.
You mean physical attack, or you mean intellectual, like outcast, and you grab onto the outcasts of Hindus, while the person wanting to reconvert or ghar wapsi to Hinduism. So I mean, if there was an attempt to convert, then there was an equal attempt by the Hindus to bring in the people who wanted to bring in. So that is what you're talking about, or are you really talking?
Both. Physical part was there. Physical part is where the state comes into picture. The physical intimidation and that part was taken down with state action. In the social sphere or the cultural sphere where the conversions and reconversions happened, reconversions were also there. There was no killing of Hindus for converting or reconverting. Under Hindu states, that was curtailed with physical means. Right now, it is the other way around, right? I mean, you can be killed for blasphemy, whether you are a Hindu or a non-Hindu. If you are converting a Muslim into a non-Muslim, you can be killed. But the other way around doesn't happen, and state ensures that the other way around doesn't happen. So you have created a one-way traffic with full state power. So once this is removed, and that is what Hindutva is probably trying to do, to whatever success that is
I
debatable.
mean,
But
maybe in words, but I don't think there is any understanding. I mean, of this is uniform civil code a tool for doing that?
Uniform Civil Code is basically trying to get to a least common denominator, nothing more than that. If you can't have polygamy, they can't have polygamy. That's the kind of, that doesn't. If human nature is inherently diverse and state should not be imposing itself to decide how people should live or marry, then you are better off removing those codes than imposing those codes from the state. This is all a Christian thought process, that state imposes monogamy. Human is by nature monogamous to a large extent, and that should be socially done. It should not be done from the state. Now, if it is done from the state, we are seeing what happens to the society, right? In the West, the society has broken up. Now they neither have monogamy nor polygamy. They basically have a broken society. Marriage as an institution itself broke up there. Now they have serial monogamy. It's not even monogamy. It's not any gamy at all. So if it is not a lifelong commitment, it's not a marriage at all. You cannot show cases of atrocity or oppression and say that this is an excuse for breaking up that institution. Crime needs to be dealt as a crime efficiently by the state without disrupting social institutions. That wisdom, if it is not there, then state is not doing its job correctly. Anyway, this is a digression. Going back.
No, this connects me very beautifully to what I've been hearing about on Milton Friedman and all the videos I've been sending you, not only in economic theory, but it is also about states' interference in almost every area. And what I found most profound in Milton Friedman's in lectures at Cornell University and everywhere else was this whole thing that he continues to say that the interference by the US government, for example, or any government in the Western countries, which is what most of his focus remains, has been on the single parent, teenage pregnancy, for example. The entire thrust, the woke movement to actually counterproductively puts the blacks at a disadvantage rather than all these laws, wokeism trying to lift them up. And he's spot on. I mean, he's not only talking about economic theory, but it sweeps across all social constructs. And so what you're saying is exactly that, right? Very beautiful.
Going back, this Uniform Civil Code, that is what it is achieving. Ultimately, the civil code has to be rolled back to a point where, for that matter, the whole Hindu civil code there is nothing Hindu about it. It's a Christian code foisted on Hindus without any consultation of Hindus. So this is anyway a historic atrocity that we need to roll back and correct over time. I think what they are doing as an emergency measure is through the Uniform Civil Code, they are just trying to achieve some level of homogeneity so that you can be bad to everybody instead of just one group. So that doesn't show an intent to be actually good.
Yeah. Or in their mind, it is all good. Actually, like once again, Milton Friedman says that the worst things are achieved by really good intentioned men with good intentions.
Yeah, way to hell. But I don't know that because if you read back Golwalkar, he doesn't believe it's a great idea. This may be a exigency, a contingency measure. This is the best you can achieve in the current situation because you can't redo the whole process. We don't have a framework to rewrite how civil liberties or civil constructs exist in a free pagan Hindu society. In the absence of such a theory, you are living with what you have. Within this, try to make amends in a way things can be made more equal. That's the best that can be said. Do we have an alternative to rights framework? At this time, we don't have any articulate statement of that yet. So in the absence of it, what are you going to do? We'll just tinker things here and there and say that, okay, this is more, we can live with this better than what we had earlier. But on a related note, about the incentive system, what is the, how are you going to achieve harmony? Again, the notion of religion in our constitution and the notion of right to propagate, these actually incentivize heavily the intolerant and disadvantage the tolerant. Again, these require a rework in a direction where you incentivize the tolerant and discourage the intolerant. Then we have a responsible state aiming at harmony, where you don't actually kill people for blasphemy, all these things. You ensure that state protects everybody, and then let people choose whatever way of life they want to choose on the merit of the philosophy or based on their own stature. That freedom, if it is there, then we have solved the problem. We don't actually have any insecurity that a free man is going to choose that religion above this religion, and we don't want that. But right now, when active insecurity is created by the state, that the state will protect certain group and will not protect certain group. And paradoxically, that is happening in a secular state. And that is exactly what the Haindavi Swaraj has had undone in the past and what we should be doing in the coming times.
Let's actually go to that. Let's go to some detailing of that. So one you mentioned is take away the incentive of terror as a tool to keep people from choosing whatever their life that they want to choose. Ideally, internal terror as well, like the blasphemy laws applied to their own society. Ideally, that as well, right? Not only to the Hindus, for example, for
Right.
blasphemy, like Yati Narsinghanand Maharaj saying something about the Prophet. He equally has the right to say about Hindus and about Ram and Krishna, but only if he says about the Prophet. There is Sartan se juda all over the country. In Bangladesh, they break temples. In Pakistan, they break temples against him and ask for his murder. And the state basically cannot do anything about it. So it's that terror on Hindus has to be taken away, and that you're saying that terror has to be dealt as a crime, as terror, that this you cannot do, for sure, right? That's easy for the Indian state to do. I mean, that should be very
It
easy.
is easy for the Indian state, but the Indian state or any state in the world, even the British state, I don't think this just have the wherewithal or the courage to do that. They are not equipped to do that. Now, whatever violence is happening within the West, in the Europe, do they have an understanding of how they can deal with it from a state? They know it is clearly a crime. All that is happening is crime. But are they able to deal with it? Do they have an articulate formulation of the problem, let alone solution? And are they able to bring anything through the legislation in a way they can deal with this?
So I'm not getting you. So their tool is, if you treat it simply as a crime to threaten somebody or whatever, right? For example, Macron, he says that our right to vilify anybody, whether it is Jesus or Muhammad or Ram or Lakshmi, whoever, we will allow that, and that is a value system of our nation state. And so he will project the cartoons of Muhammad on the building or whatever he did. Now, if anybody goes against it, the state will come down and treat it like a crime. Correct? So, if the murder of Charlie
Yeah.
Hebdo
So that is
journalists,
but that is not a practical statement. That's what I'm saying. That is why it is not working out there.
it's not working because the
state cannot exercise its will when society acts on its own volition.
When society, but okay.
Because if the society has its own norms saying that this is how we are going to conduct, you are not going to.
In France, for example, 7% of the society. Muslims.
Right. They are going to elect their own representatives.
Yeah.
They are going to resist any legislation that goes like this.
Yes.
Number 3, whatever crime is conducted by them, the state can't act on them with its full force because it will be termed as hate. There is a political correctness angle that is brought in by the media.
Yes, that is correct.
The liberals are operating, the media is operating. So there is nothing here about a state level formulation or a legislation that can deal with this problem. This is a ground level problem you need to deal with.
Okay. Help.
This is an operational dynamic. And this operational dynamic, they are unable to figure out how they can crack this.
Okay. Now, if you switch back to, say, Chhatrapati Shivaji, then what happened? What would have changed? If it was not treated like terror, then what would have changed?
He had no...
Come to Hindu Swaraj.
Yeah. So he had no hesitation in saying that my kingdom is like this and these are the rules.
So what is the difference between a France and a Hindu Swaraj over there? In this context, France is also saying this is my
I get
state.
That. So basically, France is a secular state. It's not a Hindu Swaraj.
Okay.
So France is not governed by dharma.
Okay. So then let's define dharma. I mean, isn't that terror is not going to be allowed? Isn't that a statement of dharma?
That is an operational statement of dharma. It is not a legislated statement of dharma. Being a secular state, it has to draw a line between religion and non-religious spheres of life. Church-state separation has to happen, and the state does not interfere with church. If the church operates in certain way, state has the right to interfere only when there is a violation of the state's powers. Here, there is no clear statement of that. In Haindavi Swaraj, there is no secular or non-secular. The king has openly said that I am going to rule my country according to this religious norm. Not religious norm, or a dharmic norm, saying that according to dharma, these people need to be protected. The Stri, Bala, Vruddha, Brahmana need to be protected at all costs. That is the first priority. And this is a question that Narada has asked to Dhritarashtra or any other king in the past. Every time we see in the Puranas where a seer goes to a king, they ask the same set of questions. Are these people protected in your country? Are the innocent fearless? Are the criminals afraid of your kingdom, of your rule? So these are the standard questions that any rishi would ask a king. Now, just try to ask the same questions today. Are your women and children and old men and learned men free and fearless today? No, they are not protected. Secular states, morals are not those. That's the whole problem. Secular state does not start with that as their priority. If you protect the soft elements of civilization, you have protected the civilization because they are going to generate the required soft power required for your future. And soft elements of civilization are most threatened in a barbaric society. So the only way you have to deal with them is you need to physically isolate them and create layers around them for physical protection. So that is more or less the centuries of past we have seen here as a response to the invasions.
A more better articulation of are innocent fearless, are the criminals fearful, and these soft elements, maybe some delving into what is this framework, maybe the Stri, Bala, Vruddha and Brahmana, the protection, are they protected? Do they feel protected? I mean, honestly, Islam would say the same thing. If you go to Saudi Arabia or the entire Muslim narrative, Indian Muslim narrative in India, if you're part of any Muslim groups, the common claim is that the crime rate is the lowest in Saudi Arabia. See, one is by what is documented as a crime. I mean, the Arabs actually are ruthless.
No. So that is where the difference comes.
Yeah.
Stri, Bala, Vruddha and Brahmana, who's Stri, Bala, Vruddha? You have a dichotomy of insider and outsider. You say protect the insider woman and attack the outsider woman. So it is all
true.
So
in Islam,
not protection of Stri, Bala, Vruddha, Brahmana. It's not dharma at all.
Yeah. So there is this whole what you're saying very beautifully is that it is our Stri, Bala, and Brahmana who are protected within Islam and within Christianity. The outsider is actually supposed to be attacked and either religiously converted or even attacked by Quran or by the Hadith. Even kufr is the worst of it all. It's not about good or bad. It's about
It doesn't
kufr.
matter. That's the whole
Doesn't.
point. So whereas your devatas all they don't ask you whether you are a Vaishnava or a Seva. The devata protects whoever is dharmic. Do you have Daiva Chintana or do you have Rujuvartana, which is probity in conduct? So Daiva is always in favor of people who follow Dharma, who are righteous, without any difference of which tradition they are following. We have countless instances of how the outsiders also, could be saved by the devatas and all. So not having a vertical split in the world into insider outsider, that is a feature of dharma anyway, right? I mean, that proved to be a disadvantage, and we had to create a Hindavi instead of a dharmic is where our conversation started. But at the state level, you don't need that dichotomy, insider outsider. Only the geographic and geocultural matter. But these rules need to be applied uniformly. You need to protect Sri Bala Vruddha of all groups, because state has to invest in what is your long-term asset. Civilization grows if the soft elements are protected.
Very, very nice. I have loved this conversation so far. I feel so enriched. Thank you so much, Shankar.
Only addition would be in the extension of the same thing. Just compare what is happening in Kerala, Bengal, Kashmir, or Bangladesh. What happened to your the non-Muslim Stri Bala Vruddhas? How they are treated? How you treat the weakest of the outsider is a mark of your civilization, or your standing. So that gives a very good coordinate or a framework for us to compare and see when we draw these false equivalences between, they say the same thing or they aim the same thing, they all seek the same God, all these kinds of things. That is why I say once you get to lived reality, it looks exactly the opposite of what is claimed. Then you get into the debate that all this is done in spite of the doctrine and not because of doctrine. You are saying that the whole society is operating in spite of the doctrine. Then what is the use of the doctrine? Why don't you just leave a doctrine that can't be applied to a large population? Yeah, I think as we probably talk more about the doctrinal or the worldview or the theology, we can see these more clearly.
And then, as a promise, we have to talk about devatas as well and move into that context as well, Shankar. Thank you very much once again. This has been really, really beautiful. If you like it, please ask your questions, like I said, to me, to Shankar, in the YouTube comments, and we can take up some of these as we go along in our conversations. Wonderful. Thank you for your time, Shankar. Namaste.